Hello, and welcome back to the Punt Intended podcast, a dynasty fantasy basketball podcast and a sports ethos production presented by FanDuel. On today's episode, if you're watching on YouTube, you can already see it. We are joined here by the three members of Angle Fantasy Basketball. So we'll start with them before we get into our topic. Kind of go around the square here. I guess it's a square. Mitchell, we'll start with you. How you doing?
Good, man. Really excited for, just talking hoops. The trade deadline was anticlimactic, but some very unique trades. So I'm really excited to dive into that with you and how it impacts fantasy from both a redraft and a dynasty perspective.
Are you saying the Xavier Tillman and that Celtics last minute dump set that didn't get you all riled up, Mitchell? Come on.
Definitely not. But there's some definitely other trades that, we'll talk about very shortly.
That's fair. Then we'll go with Andrew. Andrew, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Mark. Great to go back to back. We did a podcast last week, so glad to kind of come back and just do another trade deadline discussion. And I'll throw a trade out there that excited me. I like Vit Krejci in Portland.
Yes,
like Mitch said, it's anticlimactic, but there's some unique trades that happened, and I think he's been actually a pretty good fit there for them.
I wrote about that in my article that came out last week. Like, hey, you know what? I know y'all are in deep leagues too. I was like, Vit Krejci to Portland. I love that if you roster Vit Krejci. That's great. I love it. He's already, I think, doing pretty well over there. So good for him. Braxton, one year with you here, introducing you. Hornets, they lost that one game, but then they won again. They won again, though. They're back starting the win streak again.
Yes, I was actually there last night at the game one of the win streak. I'm glowing. Every time they win, I'm surprised. I don't know if that's ever gonna go away. They could be like in round 2 of the playoffs and be like, "Wow, they do not belong here." But yeah, I'm the Hornets doing well makes fantasy so much more enjoyable for me because I have a lot of Hornets players. So excited to potentially talk about one today. It's some really exciting trades, I thought. Doing good.
Good to hear. I mean, you sound like a fan that's been stung in the past. Like a jaded fan, but I can definitely understand that.
Real quick, I'll just give a personal anecdote because I went to the Miami Hornets series in 2016. I was in high school, and I wasn't even super into basketball then. And I was at the game with the purple shirt guy, which some people may be familiar or not familiar, but I was there. And then after the game, I didn't realize that would be the last time they were in the playoffs for 10 years. So I've just been in agony for the last 10 years. I'm like, oh, I like the Hornets now. And then I just have no idea what I signed myself up for. So I'm enjoying these last few weeks, I guess, to say the least.
Braxton, was that when Jeremy Lin had that crazy hair?
Jeremy Lin, yes, he was on that team.
Oh my gosh, dude. He was just like poking people with his mohawk.
Yes, dude. Yes.
The weapon, man.
Well, I guess we got a little bit of Braxton's like villain origin story there, or maybe hero origin story. We'll go hero origin story. We'll stay on the up. He's been biding his time for 10 years in like the training dojo.
I've been putting in my work. I've been putting in my time.
Yeah. Well, let's get to our basically the topic of the day, and that's what this pod's going to be, is talking about polarizing players. Now that we have a little bit of post-deadline stuff, we have about not too many games, but a little bit of time for this to sink in and for us to kind of marinate our thoughts. And so it's going to be players who move teams or maybe didn't move teams, but talking about this roundtable discussion here. Did these players' dynasty value increase? Is it worse? What are the factors to consider with each of these players? And the first player, I think very timely, is Jaren Jackson Jr. Now, we are recording this on February 12th, where it was earlier the day we recorded, announced that he's having that surgery with the tumor in his knee, or benign growth or tumor that could become a tumor. It's a benign growth that they're going to remove. He's going to be out for the rest of the season. We have the whole fine with the Jazz tanking dropping. We're going to leave aside discussion over the injury and stuff. We'll assume that Jaren Jackson's going to recover fine from this, not going to be an issue going into next season. So just focusing on Jaren Jackson Jr. now on the Jazz. I'll start with you, Mitchell. What do you think of this trade, and then what do you think it means for how they'll use Jaren Jackson Jr. going forward?
So I kind of envision a similar structure to how he was with the Grizzlies, where he played that power forward spot. I know Walker Kessler has always been flirted around the league as being a trade asset where, they're trying to sell him for 2 first-round picks, but the best offer that they can get is 1 first-round pick. He's played it alongside, big men like him, like a Zach Edey and Steven Adams, and he provided great top 20 value for, over the last 3 to 5 years. And, before the news from today of how he was going to be a huge risk to being shut down, that's what I wrote on my notes. I was like, oh, he's going to be a huge shutdown risk. The Jazz are shameless with their tanking antics. One day they're going to be playing, but then they sit out in the fourth quarter after they're up in a competitive game. It's very frustrating, especially from a redraft perspective. But from a completely dynasty perspective, I still like Jaren Jackson here. I think he's going to fit very well with the Jazz. I am interested in where they're going to be drafting. I know they're gunning for a top pick. Luckily, there's only one real front court player in the top 5, which is Boozer. But I'm really envisioning a pretty healthy, like top 20, top 30 type seasons over the next couple of years to come for Jaren Jackson Jr.
It sounds like you basically think he can just maybe not get back to full peak production, but not too much of an impact with the surrounding players. Andrew, I kind of want to shift now to the offensive side with Jaren Jackson Jr. Do you think that, Keontae George, Lauri Markkanen, maybe Ace Bailey, they take away shots from Jaren Jackson Jr. that maybe keep his usage down a little bit? Or do you think Jaren Jackson Jr. is just going to find his place and he is going to be prioritized enough in this, we'll call it new lookish Jazz offense next year?
I mean, there's certainly a lot of mouths to feed in regards to, I guess we'll call them like ball dominant players. Keontae George and Lauri Markkanen have had the ball quite a bit this year. Lauri Markkanen is quite up there in fantasy, like for 9-cat value right now, but we've seen this before where he'll have these huge rises in value based off of generally really, really good shooting. That's kind of like why 9 category models will favor him a lot. And so, if next year, let's say if he's not shooting as well, like 47% from the floor, 89% from the line right now for Markkanen, like with Jaren Jackson, he did have a pretty good offensive load during his time on Memphis, but it didn't seem like there was as many kind of big time scorers on the team aside from it was mainly just him and Ja Morant. He did have Desmond Bane playing with him too. So he operated within a big 3. So perhaps this still can work with Markkanen and Keontae George. But guys like Ace Bailey, who has had a decent rookie season, it hasn't been incredible, but it's been decent. I'm not too worried about them. And then obviously Walker Kessler is not someone who takes up a ton of usage on offense either. And that's who he's likely going to be playing with most of the time. So I think the potential to be around, hang around maybe close to 20 points per game is probably still there because he's operated in a big 3 before.
Yes, I mean, 20 points a game, that'd be a slight dip from the peak, about 22.5 points per game. But 2.5 points per game matters, but it's not the biggest drop off. And, maybe it comes with a little more efficiency or we see some other things kind of balance out for that offense. It's still pretty good from Jaren Jackson Jr. Braxton, do you have any additional thoughts on Jaren Jackson Jr. and what you project the Jazz to look like next season?
Well, I'll just say I'm so incredibly annoyed with the Jazz, and I think I'm probably going to write off owning any Jazz player. Well, I had already said this a year ago, but I think I would be very concerned as a dynasty owner. I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach here. One, because he plays for Utah, and until they stop playing the way that they do, I don't think you can trust them for anything until you see it, right? I mean, you can expect them to stop doing it next year. But I think some people thought last year that they would stop doing it this year if they got Ace Bailey, right? I think the most annoying part is that they have enough talent on this team to be maybe even a play-in team if they tried, right? They're doing all this stuff with yanking his minutes around and singing in the fourth quarter. But anyways, from a fantasy perspective, I'm actually a little bit more concerned about Walker Kessler than I think Mitchell or Andrew, you guys are. One, I don't know if there's going to be as many scoring opportunities for Jaren Jackson on this Utah team outside of nights where maybe they're sitting a lot of guys. But again, the trade-off there is, okay, if they're not going to be sitting a lot of guys, that means they're competitive, right? And you want them to be competitive and he'll be in the lineup more. But if they are sitting a lot of guys, there's more risk for him to be sitting on those nights, right? So there's kind of I guess, a trade-off between there. And then 2, I think the rebounds are going to drop a little bit for him. They're already not very good for a center. And if he plays next to Walker Kessler and Lauri Markkanen, it's going to affect both Lauri and Jaren Jackson and Walker Kessler. All three are going to be cannibalizing each other for these rebounds. And Jaren Jackson is very underwhelming in that category to begin with, right? Around 5, maybe 6 per game on his career. If it gets down to 4, then it's like, okay, this is Miles Turner levels of bad. This guy can't rebound. And then also, I think something that not a lot of people are thinking about is defensively. Are the defenses going to be schemed in a way that allows him to get the same amount of block opportunities with Walker Kessler also patrolling the paint, right? I think that's a huge part of Jaren Jackson's value. It is a huge part of his value, right? And if he loses some of those block opportunities to a Walker Kessler, whether that's a rotation and they want Kessler to rotate in, or Jaren Jackson maybe guarding somebody out on the perimeter a little bit more, that it could be something that could affect his value. Even a decrease in half a block per game could be largely impactful for someone who you consider to be a top fantasy player, especially with this skill set. I think he's kind of lost that label from last year and headed into this year. I think people are a little bit lower on him coming into this year, but that is kind of the expectation, right? He shoots the threes, he gets the blocks, he scores. I mean, that's how much can you ask for in a big? But I think there's reason to believe that some of that is going to be decreasing here moving into next season.
So I'm going to press you a little bit on playing along Walker Kessler, because I think that is defensively the big question, right? How's that going to scheme work? When Jaren Jackson, I think his defensive player of the year season, it was 22-23, I believe, when he averaged about 2.5 blocks. He did play a lot of
3
blocks, even better. He was playing along Steven Adams, who, doesn't exactly go out to the perimeter. Now, Walker Kessler's a much better rim protector than Steven Adams. But in terms of the more lumbering big who's going to hang around the paint, I think in that way, there are somewhat stylistically similar on defense in terms of the spaces they occupy.
Sure.
Do you think with maybe this Jaren Jackson age and with Kessler being that better rim protector, the scheme might be a little different though? And then we can maybe we don't see those blocks come back as strongly.
I do. I think, one, just from an injury perspective, they're going to want to be a little bit careful with Jaren Jackson. Maybe they'll play him at the 4 almost exclusively, kind of looking at like an Anthony Davis type situation. Not that Anthony Davis is, shorted in the blocks department, but typically when they're playing AD next to a 5, it was somebody like Derek Lively or Gafford who can block shots, but when AD was on the floor, AD was kind of the main rim protector, regardless of who he was next to. But anyways, that wouldn't be the case with Walker Kessler on the floor, who probably is one of the better shot blockers in the league, right? So I have a really hard time imagining he's going to. I don't think he was ever going to get back to 3 again anyway. But if it's down by like 1.2, 1.3, I mean, that's significant. It's enough to like be concerned about that drop, especially if some of the points go with it and some of the rebounds go with it. Maybe this is intense, but I don't see a scenario where this is good for Jaren Jackson. I don't think we see an increase in usage. I don't think we see an increase in efficiency. I don't think we see an increase anywhere. Maybe the Jazz are a better team than the Grizzlies were in 2 years, right? But I don't know how this is good for Jaren Jackson personally.
Interesting. Okay, this sounds like you're down across the board, but definitely highlighting the defensive and rebounding aspects, which I do share those concerns a little bit. I would almost say Jaren Jackson Jr. is almost such a poor rebounder already. Like, how can it get much worse, even with the names that you mentioned? But it could get worse. It very well could get worse. Before moving on to our next player, Mitchell, I'll bring it back to you. Any final thoughts, any counters you maybe want to add to Braxton, maybe in terms of that offensive side?
Not necessarily counters, but I do want to share in our Angle Fantasy League, he did just get traded, which gives you an indicator on what his value is like. I know this specific circumstance was because there's a team who's in the playoffs versus a team who's, not really looking to be in the playoffs, but he went for Isaiah Hartenstein and who was the other player?
Adam Bona. Yeah.
Adam Bona for Jaren Jackson and 2 second-round picks. So Isaiah Hartenstein's another player that we're pretty down on this year compared to last year because, the Thunder are resting different players. They're really poised towards that direction of getting their players ready for the postseason. And, Hartenstein, he last year was like a top 60 asset. This year in our ranks, he's around the 80s. It's kind of an indicator of where, I guess, in a very extreme value of like Jaren being sold very lowly and that like 60 to 80 range. Now, I don't think he is going to be valued that way in the off season. Obviously, he's going to prep, he's going to get that training camp all down, as he rehabilitates from that injury. But, maybe those days where he's a top 20, top 30 dynasty asset are over. And we're kind of thinking more of, the top 40, top 50 side of things. Still a very valuable player, though, because of that unique skill set. Maybe more on the lines of like a Brook Lopez on the Milwaukee Bucks when he was kind of in his prime of things during those championship windows.
Do you want to add context on that trade? It is a salary league. So, Jaren Jackson Jr. making about $35 million this season. Isaiah Hartenstein about $30 million. However, Isaiah Hartenstein, potential free agent, probably won't make as much, could make even less potentially. Mm-hmm. And Jaren Jackson Jr. is shooting up to that mid 40s, high 40s amount. So that could maybe, Isaiah Hartenstein, more of a 60 to 80 ranked player. Jaren Jackson Jr. probably around the 30s right now. That salary could bridge that gap there a little bit. But still, I think that's a good example and illustration of, Jaren Jackson Jr. is losing, I think, it sounds like we all think he is losing a little bit of that oomph. It's just a question of how much, or I know it's kind of not bottoms falling out, but it might be a tier or two drop from him. I think it'll be interesting to see, though, what the Jazz do with them, especially if it looks like they're pushing their chips all in next season. We'll just have to see how that plays out, though. Braxton, you mentioned the Wizard or Anthony Davis in the center, and it's going to bring us to our next player here, and Alex Sarr in the Wizards. And notice at the beginning I said players, we're talking about players who traded, and I added in there players who weren't traded because Alex Sarr wasn't traded. Now, personally, with Alex Sarr, the Wizards brought in Trae Young, a passing maestro who's going to give Alex Sarr plenty of good looks. But now they also brought in Anthony Davis, who, he's not going to play every game with all his health issues, but he is going to play some. I'm personally worried that Anthony Davis could occupy similar spaces as Alex Sarr or take away some of those easy looks. Anthony Davis is, let's be real, he's a 5 as much as he says he wants to play a 4. He's a 5. Does Alex Sarr get a little shoved out? I'm a little concerned of that personally. Andrew, we'll go to you first here. Do you think that Alex Sarr ends up kind of ceding a little bit to Anthony Davis and that maybe caps his ultimate ceiling? Or isn't for Dynasty, there's not too much concern there? I'm a little too concerned over that.
I know, it's crazy. Like, I know, especially as a Lakers fan, AD always wanted to play next to a center. He's always wanted to play power forward. And I know Sarr has been the starting center for Washington because they don't really have anybody, obviously, bigger than him, to be clear. And what's funny to me is AD's playing power forward next to a center who might honestly be a little smaller than him, which kind of just was a weird balance to me. I've seen it out there it's great that AD is going to play alongside Alex Sarr, and I don't know. I just found that to be weird. But going into your question, I think there is possibility, going back to what we said with Markkanen and Jaren Jackson and Kessler, there is possibility for Davis and Sarr to kind of poach from each other a little bit. So, one thing that Sarr owners have going for them is, how available is AD going to be throughout the year? I know this year maybe isn't the best example to use just because it seemed like the Mavericks weren't super intended on competing to begin with. They sent out weird signals all throughout the season, but they just really haven't been competitive at any point. So there was, yeah. So, there wasn't really a push to get AD out there that often, whereas next year, what we talked about in the beginning with unique trades, it was unique to see some teams that we've known as tankers for a while buy some veteran talent, all-star talent, like the Jazz getting Jaren Jackson and now the Wizards getting Anthony Davis and Trae Young. So, yes, they can poach from each other a little bit, but Anthony Davis enjoys playing alongside another center. I think that they can also complement each other in a little bit of a way too, especially because Sarr has been doing a lot of outside shooting. So perhaps they can coexist. But it's just something that I do want to keep a close eye on. And we'll see, obviously, how healthy AD decides to stay next year.
It sounds like, you have a little bit of concern, but you think it will work itself out. Braxton,
the Wizards don't have a lot of front court depth anyway. So for now, it's them. Yeah.
Braxton, I want to go to you next, because with Jaren Jackson Jr. to Jazz, you highlighted Kessler and Markkanen taking away some rebounding chances.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say, there's not much front court depth, but that has meant Sarr hasn't had to compete for any rebounds in his first 2 seasons. Can I just not even have you talk, just copy paste your voice and put it in this section with this insert Alex Sarr for Jaren Jackson Jr. here? Is that appropriate?
I would say so. I mean, I'm for the same reason I'm concerned. One, I like the pairing in real life, right? Especially with these 2 shot blocking bigs. You got the twin tower thing. I love that. That's one of my favorite, kind of team builds. The Cavs do it really well with Mobley and Allen. And then
to be clear, I think I like the Jaren Jackson trade IRL. I like the Alex Sarr trade IRL, but we're talking about fantasy and dynasty here, so
right?
Just to add that caveat here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely some concern for me on Alex Sarr, the same way I was with Jaren Jackson. If it's not going to be good for him in any scenario, right? It can't be good, and you can try and downplay that as an Alex Sarr owner, same way you could with a Jaren Jackson owner, but it's not like this move. I mean, there's just no scenario where it's good for him. It can only be bad, right? Period. I mean, I don't know if there's much more to say about that. If he was getting all of the rebounds and he was the sole rim protector and he's kind of the sole big out there, and they have Keyshawn George playing the 4 or Justin Champagnie playing the 4, that's great for Alex Sarr, right? But if you have somebody like AD out there who's going to be stealing rebounds, stealing those shot blocking opportunities, stealing offensive touches, especially with pick and roll opportunities with Trae Young, Alex Sarr is not going to get the priority on that. It's going to be Anthony Davis, right? So what does that relegate him to on the offensive end? Catching and shoot threes? It could be okay if he's knocking them down, right? But if he's not, he's going to take field goal percentage. He's not going to get any high percentage looks. I'm not saying this is not an absolute, right? But I'm saying this is a possibility for something that can happen to Sarr. It's just not good for him, period.
I mean, it looks like I could just copy and paste your audio, and we could have just scooted you off to the side to the section. Let's bring it to you, Mitchell, here now. I'm going to ask you 2 questions here. One, do you agree that this is probably a slight ding to Alex Sarr's value in the short term? And then 2, do you think, or are you concerned at all long-term for him, dynasty? We're talking, maybe 2 to 3 years down the road. Does this change your dynasty outlook on Sarr at all?
Well, I mean, those are 2 very good questions. In the short term, definitely. Now that the Wizards are looking to change the direction of their franchise, they brought in Trae Young, they brought in Anthony Davis. They're going to look to compete in a very open Eastern Conference where, they are surging up in terms of talent. Those young guys on the Wizards are going to have 2 to 3 years under their belt. They're going to look to make at least a play-in push, similar to Braxton Charlotte Hornets. Similar age trajectory, skill-wise trajectory is going up too. But long-term, I'm not necessarily too concerned because over the last 7 years, Anthony Davis has only played over 60 games twice. And I'm not entirely optimistic on his availability as he continues to age. So short-term, definitely, I don't see Sarr putting up those top 30, top 40 numbers that we're seeing this season. He's not going to have that same offensive opportunity. However, on defense, Anthony Davis likes to play the 4 and kind of roam around. Alex Sarr is going to play that 5 spot. The roles are going to be reversed on offense, though. AD likes to play in the mid post. He likes to play across the elbow. Alex Sarr is more the stretch 4 in that lens. So it's like flip-flopping different roles between offense and defense, ultimately hurting his value offensively. But defensively, I think he'll be fine in terms of the blocks that we really love. And he's never been a great rebounder. I know he's improved that over the course of this season. But, in the 2 to 3 year kind of range that you're looking at in terms of the long-term discussion of a healthy dynasty league, I wouldn't be too alarmed on his production. He's putting better numbers than Evan Mobley this season. Yes, Anthony Davis is a lot better than Jarrett Allen. However, Anthony Davis is almost 10 years older than Jared Allen. So, that window in terms of those two as a duo isn't as long as you may think, just because AD's game hasn't aged particularly too well over the last 2 years or so. And I don't see him, being as, giving that same production as like a Stephen Curry or a KD up in those like mid 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, I would be shocked if I'm hoping AD can keep playing at a high level for a few more seasons. I mean, I'd personally be shocked if it's like 3 years from now and we're talking about AD still as that sort of player, just with the injuries he's had, sadly. Andrew, we'll end it here, coming back to you here with Alex Sarr. Do you just think there's maybe now a little bit of like, I don't want to say cap ceiling, because I never like to say, players can't still develop or things, but do you think there's maybe we see Alex Sarr just have a little less room for growth, reaching whatever his ultimate upside is going to be? And then does that impact then if you are looking at him now, you can have to project more of all right, maybe he might stay around this level before we see that additional leaps in his game, if that's to come?
I would have to say yes, as long as AD is playing, because right now he's in top 30 for us. And if the numbers are going to take a hit, I mean, when you're that high up in dynasty ranks, if even the slightest slip, we have to knock you down, just because there's so many great players up in that range. So, as long as AD is around, as long as he's a prominent part of the offense, yes. So obviously, of course, with context that he's hurt, or as you alluded to earlier, I would also be shocked if 3 years from now he's still this same player. So it is definitely a very short-term issue, but being that high up there, if he's going to take a hit to rank, then he is going to slip down a little bit dynasty-wise too.
Can I say something though? If you're
no, you can no. Just go ahead.
I just think, and I know you guys aren't saying this, but if you're planning for something to happen 3 years from now, like you're banking on AD leaving 3 years from now, I think that's a really poor way to look or value players. Again, I know that's not what you guys are saying.
Oh, okay.
I just want to say, if you completely discredit this AD thing because 3-4 years from now he's gonna be 37 or whatever it is, I don't know if that's a fair assessment to make, right? I think you need to be. Maybe I don't draw my point too hard, but I think there is concern, and I wouldn't just brush it away because of AD's age, right? He's going to stick around as long as he's under contract. So,
yeah, and I really think that like Alex Sarr, it does affect him negatively, but what we're not talking about is how AD probably affects like Keyshawn George and Bilal Coulibaly even more, where maybe they're not these top 100 dynasty assets in 2 to 3 years. As long as he's there. I think Alex Sarr is probably the most minimally effective from those front court players, especially from that younger, next generation of Wizards.
That'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I will say I'm kind of now a little interested. I'm going to combine teams punts here. Now, I'm a little jazzed to see what the Wizards do next season, just to see, especially if they add a top 3 draft pick. I mean, that could be kind of fun. Could be magical next season for them. In terms of Sarr, though, it feels like we're all kind of, I mean, it's obviously hurts his short-term production, but I think we still have the same view of Alex Sarr as a player. It's just, when you play along other players, it's going to impact your production in some way or form. Let's move now to a guard, and I haven't really seen much discussion about this player's dynasty value. Maybe because he's been in and out of the lineup the whole season, but we're going to talk about Darius Garland here, going from the Cavs to the Clippers. And I thought it was, obviously, that was a very interesting, I'd say almost challenge trade from the Cavs. And I think there's been a lot of talk on that, but I haven't seen as much talk on the Clippers and Garland. I mean, there's been some about talk, what do the Cavs know? If there's some medicals that maybe we should be a little more concerned about than just saying, hey, it's a toe injury, he'll recover from it, he'll be fine. And that's kind of where I want to frame this discussion. I know it's tough. I don't want to play armchair analysts and try to analyze injuries, but I think teams sometimes indicate to us what they feel about a player and their future going forward. Braxton, I feel like you're nodding your head a little bit here. Do you feel like you have some things to say on this?
It's funny you said that. I do have some things to say, but I'm not in my head because I can't sit still. No, I Darius Garland, this is definitely good for his value. I was very concerned, and we've talked about in the past, even before this season, how concerning it was for Darius Garland on this Cavs team next to Donovan Mitchell. And a lot of people for a while had him, top 30, top 35 dynasty ranking, and he hadn't justified that much, right? And I think being on this Clippers team is really going to give him an opportunity to show, hey, I can be this top 40 dynasty asset, and his owner to have believed in him. Let's say you've owned him for a few years now. You've probably bought into the hype at some point, right? Otherwise you would have sold. So this move to the Clippers where he gets to be, maybe not the number one guy, but, maybe the 1.5 guy or something, right? It's called a high 2 or a 1B, I guess would be a good way to put that. That he will get to justify that, or he will get the touches, he will get the usage, he'll be able to get the assists, the points, whatever he needs to do to be able to rank highly. So this is very good for him. I would be ecstatic if I was an owner. Now, short term, and I know there's kind of that caveat with, I feel like all of these guys thus far is like, there is some concern here, right? I mean, specifically because of the Clippers said, we're going to be very cautious with him. And that's kind of it. If he comes back, he's probably pretty limited. He's going to sit back to backs, and then next year he's maybe ready to go. But sure. If you're a competing team, I think expect nothing and be pleasantly surprised with what you get out of him this season, if anything. So, but I definitely like this for him. And when I say long term, I mean like next year and then maybe the year after, not 3-4 years out. Because I just
you don't like to talk about 3+ years.
No, it's because Luka could get traded 2 more times before then, right? So I mean, just so much could happen where it's like I don't even think it's worth thinking about that. I know that was a joke, but I just don't think it's worth thinking about that far out.
Luka to the Hornets. You heard it first.
I did hear it first on this podcast. Yes, I think that is true.
I didn't hear that.
All right. Well, Andrew, we'll go to you with those thoughts. I guess, is rival team appropriate? Rival team of the Lakers, Clippers, making a move and kind of getting that younger point guard. Do you share Braxton's optimism, enthusiasm for Garland here now, potentially being that man-made on the Clippers? Or do you think there is maybe any cause for concern? Or are you just gonna go more into this hype now with Garland?
The hypes, I would probably be on that side. I think it's a great landing spot for him. It even kind of echoes what we discussed last week with Benedict Mathurin. We liked him in this, kind of a revitalization of his dynasty value in this spot with the Clippers, especially if they decide to extend him. But with Garland, he's already been extended by the Cavs, so they are cool, obviously, with the Clippers are absorbing that. He's kind of going to be one of the focal points of the team. They were a big three centered around Harden, Kawhi, and Zubac, basically. And with arguably two of the most popular players on the Clippers gone, you want those younger guys. Like seems to be the direction that they're moving in. Kawhi and obviously, like Batum, Brook Lopez are still there, a couple of other veterans, but the main, like in regards to a star level player, Kawhi is the main veteran there. And Garland's competing with, like Chris Dunn, not a ton of backcourt competition for him. So it's really just, they'll probably be cautious within this season. You want both of those big toes to heal. The fact that there's an issue with both toes isn't the best. So we want that taken care of because toes have kind of come up with Garland before. So if he's going to get held out, fine. We want him coming back and full force next year for the Clippers in what is, they'll still probably make the play-in just because of the tanking that's going on below them. Like they're not going to catch Memphis. They're not going to catch the Jazz. But it is a lost season for them, respectively. Like they probably
they don't have their pick. They have to compete.
Right. So it's not like they're going to, trot out Coby Sanders, Jordan Miller, and bench everybody else. But it is also they're kind of in the zone of let's see what we've got with these young guys because Brook Lopez, Nick Batum obviously can't be the plans of the future, and they have to also plan for the post Kawhi era as well.
Yeah, the Clippers definitely have higher aspirations than what they're currently at. So we'll have to see where they go from there. Mitchell, you just gonna share the same optimism? Is it that simple? Just Garland's now the main man, or are there other things we should consider here with Garland on the Clippers?
No, I mean, 100%. I'm going to be an echo chamber here. This is definitely a win for Darius Garland. And to your question, yeah, they are going to view him as a clear centerpiece post Kawhi moving forward. They essentially traded, James Harden for a player of a similar position, point guard, who's 9 years, 8 years younger. And they followed up that trade by moving Ivica Zubac for Benedict Mathurin, Isaiah Jackson, and 2 firsts, where they could get lucky if that pick for 2026 lands between 5 to 9. So it is a coin flip, very risky on Indiana's side. So I'm not too sure why they did that, but I know they're the worst team in the East. So, hopefully the odds are in their favor. I really like that team as a side note. But yeah, the Clippers don't have control of their first round pick until 2030 due to those SGA trades and the James Harden trades from Paul George to James Harden. And, they really, yes, they have to balance that patience as a virtue with Garland. They don't want to have any long-term issues with him moving forward because they do value him as that centerpiece, but they also do need to compete. So moving forward over the next 4 years, Garland's going to be heavily relied on. And, we really hope that we see those 8 assists per game, the more usage before Donovan Mitchell and those top 40 years, before Mitchell went to the Cavs, right? So that's the optimism that I share, and I think Darius Garland can get there with the ball in his hands.
I think you all make good arguments. Seems like none of you share my, I guess, the more pessimistic side where, what if these toe injuries are more chronic, or what if the Cavs know something we don't? That probably is on my end looking maybe a little too much into it. And ultimately, I think, as you all pointed out, I think there's more upward pull with Garland being that man, especially if he can get those assists. At the very least, even if that jumper doesn't fully come back, that accuracy on the floaters and such, 8 assists is 8 assists, and he can definitely do that even if he doesn't have that same touch on his shot. So there probably is more upward pull than downward pull with Garland here. Let's shift now to, we'll go to players a little bit lower, maybe not as flashy trades, but I think players that definitely are still important in Dynasty to talk about, especially we're talking even the hundreds, 150 ranges of Dynasty rankings. These players are still important. Maybe this player is higher than that, though, and Coby White going to the Hornets. So, of course, Braxton, we have to start with you here, being a Hornets fan. What do you think of this trade? What do you think Coby White's role will be? Are you worried that maybe it's basically just a Colin Sexton plus role, or do you think he can maybe push to maybe even close games just depending on how the Hornets want to run things?
Well, I think the obvious answer is that Colin Sexton plus role, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't know if he's going to get as many shots as he did in Chicago. He shot almost 14 shots per game. I think a good way to look at it really is just to see what Colin Sexton did, in Charlotte this year, and just maybe up it a little bit. I mean, they're very similar in terms of fantasy output, right? Coby's going to get less shots, but maybe those points tick up a little bit. Maybe he's a little bit more efficient. He hasn't been super efficient this year, right? But maybe not needing to take as many shots or not being the focal point of the offense he has been in Chicago, that opens up some better looks for Coby White. It's not good for him. It's definitely not something I'd be super excited about as an owner. As a Hornets fan, I'm ecstatic, right? But I think the days of 20 points per game are over. I can see the assists sticking around 4. That seems reasonable, and the rebounds sticking around 4. But the real question is going to be: is he going to get enough usage to keep him around, I guess, a top 100 dynasty ranking if he was to re-sign in Charlotte? Maybe. I could see him being, 105, 110, somewhere in that range. But I think the days of 70, 80, 65, even in some cases, are probably over for Coby White just because of this. And then also, I'm a little nervous about, or I would be nervous if I were him, about my ability to fetch a large contract in free agency. This is not going to be good for his market coming off the bench like this. Assuming he comes off the bench, I think there's no way that the starting lineup switches. But maybe the Hornets re-sign him long-term, which again is something I'd be super ecstatic about as a Hornets fan. But as a fantasy owner, I'm probably rooting against. I probably want him to go to a mediocre or a bad team where he can take that many shots. But I don't know if that's in the cards for Coby. I think maybe he'll settle in as a solid player on a decent team moving forward, which, as we know, is you get more stability and he's going to be in the lineup, but you trade off some of the stats. So
I love that you're bringing up, not just this season, but the contract situation next season, because I think that is one of the things with Coby White we have to look at, and it's critical. And I know you all definitely look at those contracts, look at that in the future. So Mitchell, I'm going to bring it to you. Talking about Coby White's long-term future. He got basically this season is going to be an unrestricted free agent next season. Do you share Braxton's basic concept here, for lack of a better term, that Coby White is probably now maybe stuck in this more rotation role, first guard off the bench role, and then that pushes his ceiling down? Do you share a similar view?
Yeah, but that's not to say that he's not valuable as a, dynasty asset moving forward. Maybe, he isn't that top 50, top 60 guy we thought coming into the season, where he had a very blistering post All-Star game or post All-Star break, after that Levine trade went through for the Bulls, where he was averaging like 24, 5-5. And we thought, okay, this guy has something. But, this year plagued with injuries, couldn't really get into the rhythm of things. And then now, there was always that kind of concern coming from someone who plays salary, where it's like, oh shoot, Coby's going to get $35 million next season. But from a salary perspective, this is actually probably a great thing. We could probably retain Coby White for under 20 million, and he can provide you maybe not 23, 5-5, but maybe 18, 16, 4-4, maybe 1 steal a game. That's not too bad in terms of like cost production for 15 to 20 million versus the latter of like 35 million. So I guess in salary leagues, this isn't entirely a bad,
a good point. No, it's a great point. I love that.
Yeah. And then, but, to Brax's point, and to the, wide majority for redraft and standard dynasty leagues, yes, this is probably a L for him, where, he is in that spark plug, microwave scorer type role moving forward, especially now that the Charlotte Hornets have that established starting five that's working so well for them.
Can I add real quick? And Andrew, I know you probably have some thoughts, and I'm sorry if you're going to say this, but you mentioned redraft, Mitchell. The Hornets have the best playoff schedule, period, in terms of not in terms of the quantity of playoff games, but the days that they're playing on. As a redraft owner, especially if you play kind of the standard playoff weeks, take a look at that. And that could maybe offset some of the production that you're losing, right? You're getting the Hornets playing a ton of low volume days. So that's something to keep an eye out for as well if you're an owner.
That's a good shout out. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm assuming most of y'all listening are dynasty managers, but I'm sure you play plenty of redraft.
The dynasty have playoffs too. So
that's true. I mean, trade deadlines are you still probably got another couple days in most leagues, at least a week, I think, in most leagues for your dynasty trade deadlines. But we'll throw it to you, Andrew, as we close out here on Coby White. What are your thoughts on Coby White? I'll just ask it simply here.
I do still like Coby. I mean, as someone who formerly had him top 70 for Dynasty, this was when he was in Chicago. He was a name brought up on a pod I was on with Noah Rubin, where we were talking about some disparity in our ranks, and I was defending Coby White then. I'll defend him a little bit now as well too. So going back to what might help his value, like Brax said, with the enhanced playoff schedule, but also the fact of this recent Hornets run, this offense is super powered right now. Like the offensive output the Hornets are going through right now is crazy. So like everyone's, they're getting good. Like everyone's eating right now. So could that also possibly be a factor for him when he does come back? Just the fact that this offense is working so well right now, maybe he scrapes out a tiny bit more than what we're expecting. I'm not going to say this is going to be a huge swing in valuation, but maybe it's slightly better than what we were expecting. But I do still like him, the type of player he is, his age, the ceiling of going off for 25 points or better if it's a hot night for him. So I am still interested, especially if it's in redraft. You can keep him stashed in your injury slot right now, which is something I'm personally doing just because, injuries always come up. Someone who's healthy right now might not be healthy in late February, early March. So if you do get to benefit from that good playoff schedule, him being on what's performing right now as a pretty much like historically good offense, well, maybe it's not as bad as we thought.
It sounds like, in Braxton, don't worry, I saw your fist bump there at the Hornets being awesome. I'm acknowledging that. If you're listening, Braxton did a fist bump because, I mean, you know what? He hasn't had much to root for 10 years. He can finally root
them
for
and historically good offense haven't been in the same conversation in a long time.
long time. It sounds like we all, and I share similar views. It sounds like, Coby White, yeah, obviously there's more guard bodies, there's more offensive players there who are going to have the ball. It's obviously that hit. But it's not bad. It's not bad having that stability, knowing that role. And there is, I think, a clear role for Coby White being this first guy off the bench. Still is probably seeing 25 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, depending on the night, as Andrew said. It's just not going to happen as frequently. The averages won't be there, but it doesn't mean his value is just plummeted. It's still there to a degree. Let's shift now to kind of a different sort of guard/wing here, and Ayo Dosunmu going to the Wolves. I think a trade, I know for myself, maybe speaking for all of us here, but I love this trade for the Wolves, and I think it helps push them a little bit more into that Western Conference contention. The Wolves' odds per FanDuel as of February 12th to win the Western Conference Finals, now plus 1,400, about fifth in the conference, but it's a little higher. They are pushing for that lead. But as we said earlier, just because a trade is good for a team IRL doesn't necessarily mean that it's great for the player themselves. We saw in the Bulls, Ayo Dosunmu did have, I think, a good amount of run, a good amount of time to really drive hard to the basket and kind of lead things a little bit. So, Mitchell, I want to start with you here. Do you think Ayo Dosunmu can still see a similar role as he had in the Bulls, or is he going to maybe have to shift to more of this tertiary offensive option rather than more that secondary opportunistic attacker he had more in Chicago?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very similar, at least in terms of like a Mike Conley role, where, the Memphis Grizzlies need a real stabilizer who can, take a hold of the offense, where, Dante is kind of that run and gun type of player where, yes, it fits, with the Timberwolves, but, in playoff high crunch situations, you want someone who can kind of slow things down and, take quality shots and facilitate the rock. And in kind of hindsight, following all the trades with what, the Chicago Bulls have been doing, if he were to stay with the Bulls, that's probably an even worse situation for his value because of all the guards that were coming in. Outside of the one with, the swap with Rob Dillingham, they also added Jaden Ivey, who we're going to be talking about a little later. And in addition, Anthony Simons, where they swapped with Nikola Vucevic. So I think this value in terms is probably a win if he were to stay in place in Chicago, because even though we're seeing some of those guys do great things like Jaden Ivey kind of revive his value and Simons as well, Josh Giddey's not playing, Trey Jones aren't playing, two guys who are receiving pretty solid minutes, and Coby White also left as well. So there's a lot of different factors here in terms of Ayo, and I think long term this was the right place for his value, and I think it could have been worse.
Braxton, do you share that opinion that this is actually maybe a positive for Ayo Dosunmu, or do you think that maybe not? What are your thoughts here, Braxton?
Definitely a neutral to positive for Dosunmu, I think. DiVincenzo is actually losing some minutes to Dosunmu in his first few games in Minnesota. He's been struggling a little bit recently, and they've been playing him so much because they just didn't really have anybody that they could play heavy minutes. Conley was seeing a ton of time. Conley should not have been playing as much as he has this season. They essentially got him for Dosunmu, that is, for free, by the way, with Conley coming back. They can play Conley a small role, or sorry, is it confirmed that Conley's back, or they just assumed he was going to come back? Either way.
Might be delaying it, but it's pretty much he will be there probably by the time. They might be delaying it just because of we'll sign him later and then tax reasons or something. But
yeah,
Conley's path is crazy. Like, he literally got traded and then he got traded again. So now he could process the waivers to go back to the Timberwolves. He kind of like beat the system. 100%. And I get it. He's older. He doesn't want to move. He wants to stay in the same city. So sorry, Brax, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, Mitch, you and I are on the same page. I think it's possible we see if DiVincenzo continues to have a hard time, maybe Dosunmu steps into the starting lineup in DiVincenzo's place, right? It's not unreasonable to think that that is a possibility. I mean, on the season, his stats have been fine, but game to game, especially since Dosunmu's been in town, he's been having a hard time. So anyways, my point is, there are minutes there for Dosunmu. It's not as crowded as it may seem on the surface. Conley's going to lose some minutes, and it seems like they're willing to take some from DiVincenzo as well. And again, similar to some of these other guys we're talking about, if you lose any production, I don't think you will with Dosunmu, but if you do, it's offset by him being on a competitive team, right? You know he's going to be on the lineup. The Bulls are kind of shifting towards a tank, right? So if he was remaining in Chicago, there is some chance that they are a little more cautious with him than they might be in Minnesota. Not saying that they completely disregard, any injuries, right? But, when a team is struggling, okay, you got to pick up a small issue. All right, you're going to sit as opposed to, going out there and playing through it when you're competing for a title. So definitely neutral to win for Dosunmu for me.
Braxton, the Bulls are a perennial play-in team. So how dare you disrespect them by saying they're tanking?
I don't think I said they were tanking. I think did I say they were tanking? I think
run it back. If you're listening, run it back.
I think I said something like
they said changing the direction of their team, something like that.
Yeah. So you're trying to put word in my mouth here, Mark.
Plausible deniability. All right.
They're gonna run out the quintuple guard lineup and get the 5 seed. Or 10 seed. I said 5.
Yuki at the 5, Mac McClung at the 4.
Yeah,
they got it.
Yeah.
Yuki had 7 or 8 rebounds a couple games ago. I was like, okay, all right.
Yeah, he got more than Jaren Jackson. I've been seeing tweets on that. It's so funny.
That's crazy to think about. But let's bring it back to Ayo Dosunmu. And I want to go back to a point Mitchell made about maybe Dosunmu is going to be more that stabilizing guard force. I've seen some talk about that. It is kind of harkening back to his days at Illinois, where he was the point guard there. He was leading the offense. And we haven't necessarily seen him operate in that role at the NBA. So that's why I want to bring it to you here, Andrew. Do you think Dosunmu can maybe take on more of those stabilizing point guard duties, or do we see more of the slashing wing that he's been? Do you think we maybe see some assists come back for him?
I don't know. To me, it feels like slotting into the role, maybe even a slightly enhanced role, but the role Nickeil Alexander-Walker had last year, who was very important to the Wolves. And the Wolves desperately needed that back this year. I think they really missed a player like that. And we knew last year that Alexander-Walker played himself out of Minnesota. They weren't going to be able to afford to keep him. And it was clear because the Hawks paid Alexander-Walker quite handsomely for his services, and it's working out for them. So Dosunmu coming in at, $7 million, this is the last year of his contract as well. That's what I immediately thought of when I saw the trade happen. It's perfect. They got a Nickeil Alexander-Walker back again. They're the last year's version, obviously not this year's version. So there was nights last year where Alexander Walker was a bit more prominent in the lineup. He was having some good games. And then there was other nights where maybe he was faded out a little bit. And we've seen that happen with Dosunmu's career too. He doesn't have a crazy high ceiling on a night-to-night basis, but the floor is always there. And I also have followed Ayo since college. And I think, I think he's already shown pretty good assist, at least upside in the NBA. He's been hanging around there assist wise for a while, around the 3 range isn't great, but it's not terrible either. I don't know if I'd be confident in it bumping up to 4 or 5 unless Minnesota is just that desperate for further shot creation. But I think the floor of it being around 3 is always there, and just the floor of that last year's Nickeil Alexander-Walker role is always there, which to Mitchell's point is a win as opposed to, he's 26 and Chicago did a revamp with a bunch of young players. Probably wasn't going to play a ton towards the end of this year if he was in Chicago. So this is best case scenario, pretty much.
I think that was a good comp to Nickeil Alexander-Walker and slotting into that role. And I wrote about in my pre-trade deadline piece that, I thought contending teams would be more interested in Ayo Dosunmu, and then usually they bring him in. That normally means normally you go with a contender, maybe see a little less minutes. The Wolves, though, were kind of, I think, one of the few teams where, hey, actually Ayo might have that room for that greater role potentially. You all highlighted maybe the playmaking, maybe just stepping in, maybe if he has it going, he goes in that starting lineup instead of, not the starting lineup maybe, but the closing lineup instead of Dante DiVincenzo. And there is some upward room for Ayo Dosunmu here. So if you roster Ayo Dosunmu in Dynasty, this is honestly probably a good thing. And I think I speak for all of us fairly here. thinking that the Wolves will probably retain him long term unless his contract demands are crazy, but that's probably not the case. So yeah, you can probably pencil him in for this Nickeil Alexander-Walker role and signed up. I said last offseason that the Wolves should have signed Nickeil Alexander-Walker instead of Naz Reid and then figured it out at center. I know they don't have much front court depth, but I was on that bandwagon at least, and I feel justified.
It's not a bad point, honestly, man. It's not a bad. I think Naz Reid could have found probably. Well, he does play a lot in Minnesota, but he could have maybe found an even more of a usage role elsewhere too. Like,
yeah,
I would have loved Naz Reid on the Lakers. I know it's not that realistic based on our pay cap right now with LeBron still here, but yeah, I think he may have benefited elsewhere, but he is a fan favorite in Minnesota, of course. So
that is true. He is a fan favorite, very much so. All right, but I'm digressing. Let's get back to the last player here on the list. And Mitchell spoiled it earlier, but it's going to be Jaden Ivey going from the Pistons to the Bulls. Ivey started his career kind of an intriguing, I would say, off-ball, sometimes on-ball guard in Detroit. And then that leg injury happened, kept him out all of his third year. A mixed season coming back. I would say, honestly, probably a poor season coming back from that injury on the Pistons. Was really fighting for minutes with the Dennis Jenkins there. And Jenkins, honestly, I thought looked better. So the Pistons basically said, okay, you know what? We're moving on for some value now. Bulls decided to take a chance on him. And so far, I think he's at least played more in Chicago. I'd say a bit of a mixed bag there. But Mitchell, I'll start with you here. Do you think there's hope for Jaden Ivey here in Chicago? Or would dynasty managers be more buying onto the situation rather than the player?
I think this is a great sell high opportunity where, you know, he's given that opportunity to play big minutes where they don't have Josh Giddey, where they don't have Trey Jones, both players that I think are better than Jaden Ivey. And yes, there's a lot of hype going into, you know, Jaden Ivey from the draft. You know, he was seen as like a top 4, top 5 guy coming into like dynasty leagues in 2022. But, you know, the issues of the efficiency, you know, the inconsistency from 3, I know last season he was pretty good before injury, but in the totality of things, he's very streaky, and he's not someone that you can rely on unless he has a very high usage role to put up those counting stats. Unfortunately, it's Josh Giddey's team in terms of being the primary ball handler. And yes, he flashed great off-ball ability at Purdue and even a little bit last season next to Cade. I just don't think that's where his best fantasy value lies. I think he really needs the ball in his hands. And with Jaden Ivey, you know, it's just so crowded there in Chicago. You know, Simons is there too. Colin Sexton's there, who, you know, plays a very similar role as kind of a microwave scorer off the bench. He's more efficient. He's a better shooter. So really, who's to say? And then they also have Rob Dillingham to develop. I think Jaden Ivey really just gets kind of lost in the mix once this Bulls team is healthy. But right now, this is a great time to sell him to a contender, you know, where he's going to be playing these big minutes while Josh Giddey is still resting up, where Trey Jones is still resting up from injury. So, you know, great sell high opportunity for me to kind of encapsulate everything. But I am not a long-term fan of Jaden Ivey moving forward as a building block.
I love that you said Trey Jones is a better player than him. I am fully with you. I love Trey Jones. I love yes, he's smaller, but I think he's a great point guard, feisty at the point of attack. I don't know if that's spicy or not, if Trey Jones is better than Jaden Ivey in the more public or sphere out there. If you think it is, let us know in the comments below. But Andrew, I want to go to you here because on y'all's pod last week, you know, we kind of talked about Taylor Hendricks, how much leniency should we give him coming off that injury. Do you think there's been enough time for Jaden Ivey to recover from that injury and say, hey, you know what, this might be the player he is going forward? And that's, I mean, if we're being honest, that's not exactly a player that's probably worth developing. Or, hey, maybe in the I won't even say second half of the season, back end of the season, he can maybe show a little something something to latch onto for Dynasty.
I mean, there is, of course, that 30-game sample size last year where he was shooting 40%. But for me personally, like, you know, the injury does play a factor. But I think, you know, the stronger evidence goes for his first 2 years in the league. Of course, you're developing as a point guard, one of the tougher positions to play in the NBA, but the Pistons got good leading into last year. So with that being said, I mean, I think he's more the player that he is that was happening in his first 2 years with the shooting concerns. That was obviously his big swing skills coming into the draft. And so if there's someone who's maybe saying, I'm actually have more revitalized interest in Rob Dillingham than I do in Jaden Ivey, I might personally be on your side, because I think Dillingham's situation was more towards Dillingham's outcome in the early of his career was more to his situation and the coaching staff. And speaking of coaching staff, the wild card that's not really discussed yet is Billy Donovan. Bulls fans have plenty of frustration with Billy Donovan giving Modest Buzelis a short leash at times. It seems like obviously that leash has grown since the trade deadline and everything, but he is a bit punishing on his younger guys who make mistakes. And let's say if a savvy veteran like Colin Sexton goes out there and gets the job done, well, you might have some pretty pissed off Ivy fans seeing Sexton get more run than him, or seeing potentially Dillingham, or obviously we have Trey Jones and Josh Giddey coming back. Trey Jones is very reliable. Donovan's been leaning a bit on him. So Billy Donovan is that bit of that wild card. Is there a leash given to Ivy or not? We've seen it happen to Matas, who I think we can all agree is a better prospect than Ivy. So that's something to keep a close eye on too.
Yeah, I even forgot for a second that Sexton was on this team too. That's another name in this mix. Braxton, I know you're not afraid to hold back on players, so I'm going to ask this question very pointedly. Do you think Jaden Ivey is dead in the water here and his value is just plummeted?
Well, I mean, no, I think it's the shot in the arm that Ivy really needed if you were a Jaden Ivey owner. I mean, he was really barely had a pulse in Detroit. And, he really needed something like this to happen to be able to salvage any kind of value on him. I totally agree with Mitch. I think it's a huge sell high opportunity, a great selling opportunity to be able to salvage your investment. I don't think you're getting nearly what you paid for him originally, whether that was a top pick or in a trade. Maybe you bought him low during the injury, but I mean, his value has decreased significantly this year. And, it's like one of those stock charts that goes way down and goes back up for a second, and then it's going to go down and flatline again. So I don't think there's much of a great – I've never really been in on Ivy. I just don't think this fantasy skill set is there. And I don't know if there's going to be much of a positive fantasy outlook for him moving forward, but there is a very small window here kind of before a lot of trade deadlines happen in leagues, and then also before some of those guys, Mitch, you talk about, come back and take a lot of usage from Ivy. And so I just a lot of factors going into it being just the most perfect sell opportunity. Although, I mean, I think a lot of people maybe are privy to that, right? So that's something you have to kind of factor in as well. It's like, it's a pretty obvious sell opportunity. How much can you actually get for him? It's definitely better than what it was in Detroit, but it's not the best situation possible, I guess I should say.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too. Like, sell, it's always a relative thing, right? It's always, well, where does someone buy? Like, if everyone thinks he's a sell, it's like, okay, well then no one's valuing him because everyone thinks he's a sell. So it's always a tricky game there. But it sounds like none of us are really thinking Ivy's going to have a major bounce back opportunity. And yeah, maybe the situation's slightly better, but is it even with all the names that we've thrown out here with the Bulls guards? I mean, we threw out a ton of names: Josh Giddey, Trey Jones, Colin Sexton, Anthony Simons, Rob Dillingham. I love Rob
Yuki
Dillingham.
Kawamura.
Yes, Yuki Kawamura. Yes, exactly. Yuki, exactly. And there's so many names there. Maybe Yuki's a better prospect. Everyone should go pick up Yuki instead of Jaden Ivey. But I think we'll leave it there. We talked about 6 guys. I think we're pretty much all were traded except for Alex Sarr. But I think Alex Sarr is definitely an interesting person to discuss. And I think a good amount of opinions here, a lot of things for you all to think about when you're thinking about these players with these trade deadline moves, and then going into next offseason, how you want to think about these players' situations. So appreciate you all coming on. And I know I always struggle with this. I don't know who to point to say what you all got going on. I know one of you is going to speak up. What do you all have going on over at Angle Fantasy Basketball?
I'll do it. So we just had a recent Dynasty rank update. It's available on our website. What do we have? 319 players ranked for 9 category. All of our content, everything you need about us, our podcast, all of it's on this website, anglefantasybasketball.wordpress.com. And you can follow us on Twitter at anglefantasybb.
And YouTube.
Oh, yes, and on YouTube. Of course, please. Please.
And Mark is a frequent guest on our podcast. So if you like Mark.
Yes, he is. Good friend of the podcast. Absolutely.
And you all are friends of the pod as well, this pod as well. So yes, be sure to check them out. I was on the Angle Fantasy Basketball pod last week, which we talked about basically disappointing prospects and the other chance to return. That was a very fun pod, I thought. Kind of, I think, a different flavor than maybe most you hear from most Dynasty people. So I think that was a good pod to listen to and get a lot of thoughts on. Their Angle Fantasy Basketball socials will be in the podcast description and on the YouTube description, so you can find their links there. If you're watching on YouTube, please go ahead and hit that like button. Leave comment if you think we're being unfair to Jaden Ivey and you think this is now Ivey's chance to shine. JB Bickerstaff was holding him back. Let us know. Let us know in the comments. If you're on audio, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. That sort of stuff really helps the growth, and we very much appreciate it. But we'll call it a recording here. And we'll see you next time on the Pun Intended podcast, where we'll also kind of end with a review of the trade deadline before we start seeing these teams play and get into the back half of the season. But until then, we'll see you all next time on the Punt Intended podcast presented by FanDuel.